On October 11, 2006, about 1442 Eastern Daylight Time, one Cirrus Design SR20. November 929 Charlie Delta, operated as a personal flight, crashed into an apartment building in Manhattan. Pilots on board the airplane, a certificated private pilot who was the owner of the airplane and a passenger who was a certificated commercial pilot with a flight instructor certificate, were killed. One person on the ground sustained serious injuries, 2 people on the ground sustained minor injuries, and the airplane was destroyed by impact forces and post-crash fire. The flight was operating under the provisions of 14 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, Part 91, and no flight plan was filed. Marginal Visual Flight Rules, MVFR, Conditions 2 prevailed at the time of the accident. The accident airplane departed Teterboro Airport, New Jersey about 1429 and was cleared for a VFR Visual Flight Rules departure. According to Air Traffic Control, ATC, transcripts, the pilots acknowledged that they were to stay out of the New York Class B airspace. After takeoff, the accident airplane turned southeast and climbed to an altitude of about 600 to 800 feet. When the flight reached the western shore of the Hudson River, it turned to the south, remaining over the river, then descended to 500 feet. The flight continued southbound over the Hudson River until a beam of the southern tip of Manhattan, at which point the flight turned southwestbound. 6 Radar data from John F. Kennedy International Airport, Newark International Airport and Westchester County Airport indicated that the accident airplane's altitude varied from 500 to 700 feet for the remainder of the flight. About 1436, the airplane flew around the Statue of Liberty, then headed to the northeast, at which point it proceeded to fly over the East River. About 1 mile north of the Queensboro Bridge, the airplane made a left turn to reverse its course. The airplane impacted a 520-foot tall apartment building. The pilot was properly certificated to fly the accident airplane. The pilot-rated passenger was also a certified flight instructor and qualified to fly the accident plane. The safety board medical officer reviewed the autopsy results, and the extremity injuries noted for the pilot-rated passenger, who was seated in the aircraft right seat, were potentially consistent with his use of the controls at the time of a substantial impact. However, these injuries are not entirely typical of injuries from such a source, and the complex accident forces may have resulted in such injuries from other sources. No injuries were noted for the owner potentially consistent with his use of the controls at the time of impact, but the post-accident fire would likely have eliminated much of the evidence of such injuries. On the basis of the injuries noted, the most that can reasonably be concluded is that the observed injuries do not eliminate the possibility that the pilot-rated passenger was on the controls at the time of the accident. Due to the complex accident forces involved in the crash sequence, it is not possible to determine who was the pilot in control of the accident flight, if flight instruction was given, or who was manipulating the controls at the time of the accident. Although the owner had only 88 hours in single-engine airplanes, he had the basic airmanship knowledge and skill required to perform the pre-flight planning for and to conduct the accident flight. As the accident flight proceeded north along the East River, it approached the northern end of the East River exclusion where the floor of the Class B airspace transitioned from 1,100 feet to the surface, effectively requiring either a 180 degrees turn to reverse course or an ATC clearance to enter. 180 degrees turn was initiated and that the actual turn was accomplished with a bank angle of 40 degrees to 45 degrees, based on ground speed and turn radius. The airplane was only about 75% through the 180 degrees turn when it approached the western shoreline of the East River. According to radar data, this is the approximate location where the airplane began to descend. Witnesses who saw the accident airplane in flight described the motion of the airplane as wobbling from side to side and reported that it was in a pitch-down attitude and at a steep bank angle at this time. Because the turn was initiated at 40 degrees to 45 degrees rather than the minimally required 50 degrees, the pilot increased the bank angle to attempt completion of the 180 degrees turn. On the basis of the witness accounts and the loss of altitude indicated by radar data, it is likely that the pilots put the airplane into an aerodynamic stall while pulling through the turn. The accident could have easily been avoided using the right amount of bank, which was well within the envelope, or simply by using all available space by circling over the entire width of the East River, which would have been perfectly legal. It seems to me that they initially underestimated the required space and thus did not bank very steep in the beginning of the turn. However, later upon realizing their error, they could have turned right and then come back over the East River for a wider turn. Sure, there would have been some paperwork and some explaining to do, but that would have been after a happy landing and staying alive. This goes to show that pilots are often so afraid of breaking rules that they prefer to break bones instead or risk their lives to keep compliant. The safety of the flight and the airplane occupants, however, should be the main focus above all other considerations. If there is a good reason to bend regulations, there is usually no harsh fine or other legal actions against the pilot. However, even the biggest fine is still cheaper than what you might call the ultimate price paid in the ultimate currency. In human life, it seems that the pilot did not consider any of these options and thus did not aggressively or even appropriately bank the airplane throughout the turn or use the entire width of the river. Radar data indicate that the airplane was in the middle of the East Channel at the start of the 180 degrees turn as opposed to beginning the turn from the eastern shoreline. Although it cannot be determined whether the pilots were aware of the wind's effect on the execution of the 180 degrees turn, they should have been able to observe the difference in the ground track and heading and thereby determine that there was a considerably amount of wind from the east. Not to mention that this would have been observable in a routine weather briefing. If you are flying local, especially in a very tight airspace, you should always be aware of the general wind direction to plan your maneuvers and stay ahead of your airplane and free of unpleasant surprises. In sports, in business, and most of all in aviation, preparation is key to winning. While surprises are what can make a normal situation turn into a dangerous situation. This accident is a sad example for lack of preparation. The pilots did not seem to know the actual wind conditions. They did not seem to know how much space they had available to them. And for what it's worth, they did not even seem to have a plan just what they would do once they would reach the end of the East River. If you don't have a plan, if you get surprised, and then don't realize your options right away, the safe window might close real fast without a chance to go back. Speaking of all your options, It's not lost yet, and there are still oceans available, because if the pilots knew the spatial situation and knew they could use the whole river, they could have dramatically improved the turning performance by transitioning to the west side of the East River, taking advantage of the full width of the river, and making a right turn into the easterly wind. By starting the turn on the west side of the river and turning into the wind. If they would have done that, a very tame bank angle of 35 degrees would have been enough to make the turn, rather than the minimum 50 degrees required by turning in the direction of the wind. As I said, the pilots may have been concerned about the consequences of inadvertently penetrating the Class B airspace or flying over Manhattan Island. However, in a situation such as this, and even if they don't realize the threat to their life, a good pilot will place a higher priority on maintaining aircraft control than on overflying invisible borders that will not smash their plane to pieces. According to radar data and weather reports, no other aircraft were in the area at the time of the accident, and the cloud level was reported to be at 1,800 feet. Although the lower limit of the Class B airspace was 1,100 feet. And even now there is at least one more option. The pilots could have climbed as necessary to avoid buildings in the area. And that's only the options for a very average PPL holder. Now, if the pilot has an aerobatic rating or combat flying experience or other aerobatic skills, the oceans for him will multiply depending on his skills and his creativity. An aerobatic rating is not just fun, it will teach you more about yourself, your airplane, and the limits of it and yourself, and by all means it's a good investment in your safety. And this is what the NTSB concluded. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the pilot's inadequate planning, judgment, and airmanship in the performance of a 180 degrees turn maneuver inside of a limited turning space. Vice Chairman Sumwalt, concurring. I firmly agree with and support the board's report, analysis, probable cause statement and single recommendation stemming from this accident. The board determined unanimously that the probable cause was the pilot's inadequate planning, judgment, and airmanship in the performance of a 180-degree turn maneuver inside of a limited turning space. This concurring statement is an appeal to the aviation community and/or aviation researchers to develop innovative ways to improve pilot judgment and decision-making skills. 1. Judgment and decision errors are quite common occurrences and lead to accidents. 4. Example, during this accident's board meeting, staff reported that according to the NTSB's accident database, about 30% of general aviation accidents over the past decade have cited judgment as a predominant factor. The NTSB's 2005 safety study, Risk Factors Associated with Weather-Related General Aviation Accidents, cited a 1977 study conducted by Jensen and Bentel that stated that approximately 50% of aviation fatalities were related to poor pilot judgment. Additionally, FAA Advisory Circular AC 6022, Aeronautical Decision-Making, states that decision-making accidents account for 52% of fatal general aviation pilot error accidents. The Safety Board continues to cite decision-making as a factor in accidents. Bottom line is that this accident involved inadequate pilot judgment. What can be done to train decision-making, and can something be done at all? According to FAA Advisory Circular AC 6022, contrary to popular opinion, good judgment can be taught. The AC explains that aeronautical decision-making (ADM) training has been proven to reduce the number of decision-related accidents. The Effectiveness of has been validated in 6 independent studies where student pilots received such training in conjunction with standard flying curriculum. When tested, the pilots who had received ADM training made fewer in-flight errors than. This video is meant to raise awareness for this matter and hopefully inspire you, my dear fellow pilots, to get yourself some additional training. We all know aviation training is fun, it will bring you together with more aviators and will help to keep you safe. At the entrance to the NTSB's training center, there is a plaque that states, "From tragedy we draw knowledge to improve the safety of us all."